The first thing the judges noticed about him was how small he looked on that enormous stage, a thin man in a faded denim jacket standing beneath blinding white lights that made his hands tremble as he adjusted the microphone, and in that moment, before he sang a single note, 3 successful people behind a polished desk exchanged the kind of polite, dismissive glances that come from years of thinking they can measure a life in seconds, because he didn't look like a star, didn't sound confident when he said his name was Eli Carter, didn't offer a dramatic backstory on cue, and when asked what he would sing he simply said, quietly, Hotel California, causing one judge to raise an eyebrow as if to say another cover, another dreamer, while the audience murmured with mild curiosity rather than anticipation, and the host offered a rehearsed smile that suggested kindness without expectation. Eli stood there absorbing it all, the underestimation, the weight of it pressing against his chest like an old familiar hand, because he had lived his entire life being measured and found lacking, from teachers who assumed he wasn't bright because he rarely spoke, to employers who passed him over because he had no polished resume, to strangers who saw his worn boots and thought they understood his worth. And as the opening instrumental cue began, soft and recognizable, a ripple of nostalgia moved through the room while one judge leaned back, already bored, another checked their pen, and the third smiled politely as if preparing to say no gently. But what none of them knew was that Eli had been carrying this song with him for nearly 20 years, ever since the night he first heard it crackling through an old truck radio while sitting beside his mother in a hospital parking lot, waiting for news they were too afraid to ask for yet. Eli had grown up in a quiet Midwestern town where dreams were practical things, steady jobs, paid bills, Sunday dinners, and music was something that lived in the background, a comfort rather than a calling. But his mother, Sarah Carter, believed deeply in small kindnesses and invisible strengths, the kind that didn't need applause to matter, and when his father left before Eli turned 6, she worked 2 jobs without complaint, humming as she folded laundry at midnight and singing softly while cooking cheap dinners that somehow always tasted warm. And when she was diagnosed with a degenerative illness that slowly stole her strength but never her gentleness, Eli learned early that love wasn't loud, that courage often looked like getting up again when no one was watching. By 14 he was helping her dress, by 16 he was working after school to help with bills, and by 18 he had quietly set aside any thoughts of college or escape, choosing instead to stay, because kindness sometimes meant sacrificing a future you wanted for someone you loved more. During those long years, music became his refuge, something he practiced late at night with a battered acoustic guitar a neighbor had given him for free after hearing him hum while taking out trash, and Hotel California became more than a song. It became a map of longing and survival, a melody that held the mystery of escape and the truth that some places you can never fully leave. And the night his mother passed away, after months of hospitals and whispered prayers, Eli sat alone in her empty room, holding her hand until it went cold, and when he finally stood to leave, the radio by her bed played that familiar opening riff, and for the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to cry, because the song carried both sorrow and strange hope, a reminder that beauty could exist even in endings. Years later, standing on that stage, Eli inhaled slowly, closed his eyes, and sang the first note, not loudly, not dramatically, but with a warmth so unexpected it felt like the room itself leaned forward, because his voice wasn't perfect in the technical sense, but it was honest, textured with experience, carrying a quiet ache that slipped past judgment and went straight to the heart. And in that single note something shifted. The judge who had leaned back sat upright, the pen stopped moving, the polite smile faded into something real. As Eli continued, his voice growing steadier, weaving through the lyrics not as a performer showing skill but as a man telling a story he had lived, and when he sang about the dark desert highway and the cool wind in his hair, it sounded less like imagery and more like memory, as if he had actually walked that road alone at night, searching for something he couldn't name. The audience grew silent, not the tense silence of evaluation but the reverent stillness of recognition, because everyone in that room had known loneliness, had known what it felt like to arrive somewhere hoping for refuge, and Eli's voice became a bridge between strangers, reminding them of their own quiet battles. As the song built, the judges exchanged glances again, but this time there was no dismissal, only disbelief at how wrong they had been. And one of them, a woman known for her sharp critiques and impossible standards, felt an unexpected sting behind her eyes, thinking of her own father who had worked himself into the ground so she could chase dreams he never had time to consider, realizing she had forgotten what music was supposed to do beyond impress. Halfway through the performance, something unexpected happened that would later be described online as the moment that defined the season. Eli opened his eyes and looked directly at the judges, not defiantly but gently, as if inviting them into the song rather than demanding approval, and that simple act of openness dissolved the invisible barrier between stage and table, turning evaluation into connection. When he reached the final chorus, his voice cracked, not from lack of control but from emotion, and instead of faltering, it deepened the impact, because imperfection made it human, and by the time the last note faded, the room was suspended in a breathless pause before erupting into applause that felt less like celebration and more like gratitude. The judges stood, one by one, something they rarely did, and the woman who had once dismissed him wiped her eyes openly as she spoke first, admitting without hesitation, "We thought we knew what we were about to hear, and we were wrong," while another judge leaned forward, voice thick, saying, "You didn't just sing that song. You gave it back its soul," and the third, usually sarcastic and detached, simply said, "Thank you," as if Eli had done them a personal favor. But the true turning point, the moment that transformed admiration into something deeper, came when the host asked Eli what had brought him to the stage, expecting a tale of ambition or redemption, and Eli, visibly nervous, spoke not about fame but about kindness, about a mother who believed every person mattered even when the world told them otherwise, about staying up nights with her when she was sick, singing softly so she could sleep, about how a stranger once paid for their groceries when his mother's card was declined, and how that small act of generosity had kept them afloat more than financially. It had reminded them they weren't invisible, and he said he came to audition not because he believed he would win, but because he wanted to honor her belief that sharing something honest could change a moment, maybe even a person. The room felt quiet again, and somewhere in the audience a man bowed his head, thinking of his own missed chances to be kind, while a young woman squeezed her friend's hand, feeling seen in a way she hadn't expected from a television show. The judges, now visibly humbled, spoke less like authorities and more like listeners, acknowledging how easily they had underestimated someone based on appearance and nerves, and promising, on air, to remember this lesson beyond the stage, because talent could be quiet, because humanity often whispered instead of shouted. As Eli left the stage, overwhelmed and blinking back tears, he paused briefly, turned, and thanked the judges not for their praise but for listening, a simple gesture that struck deeper than applause. And backstage he sat alone, breathing through the rush, thinking not of contracts or headlines but of his mother's smile, imagining her sitting somewhere just out of sight, humming along. In the days that followed, the clip went viral, not because it was flashy, but because people recognized themselves in it, because teachers shared it with students as a reminder to look twice. Employers forwarded it with notes about giving chances, and families watched together, some crying quietly, some talking late into the night about dreams deferred and kindness remembered. Eli didn't become an overnight celebrity in the way people expected. He didn't change who he was, but opportunities came, and with them he did something that surprised even the judges. He used his platform to highlight everyday acts of compassion, donating his first major paycheck to a local hospice, visiting hospitals to sing softly to patients who couldn't sleep, starting a small foundation in his mother's name to support caregivers who sacrificed silently, because he believed success meant extending the kindness that had carried him through his darkest nights. Years later, when asked about that audition, Eli would say it wasn't the applause he remembered most, but the look on the judges' faces when they realized they had been wrong. Not because he enjoyed their regret, but because it proved people could change in an instant if they allowed themselves to truly listen, and the story would be told again and again, not as a tale of winning or losing, but as a reminder that every person carries a song shaped by love and loss, and that sometimes all it takes is one honest note to turn underestimation into understanding, and skepticism into hope, leaving behind the quiet, enduring truth that kindness, when shared without expectation, has the power to transform rooms, hearts, and lives in ways no spotlight ever could.